And of course, it's referring to the point here in the next sentence that the reason for this is that we, or that they, that is those who are going to receive this record, might not be destroyed, because we don't, starting out, if you aren't familiar with the book, you wouldn't know this, but Mormon and Moroni know we've had two civilizations go down. And the reason they went down is because of things they didn't learn and didn't follow. And so we've been impressed and commanded to do this, that you might not be destroyed like our people have been. And Moroni, who's right, this particularly must have felt this, being alone for 30 plus years without anyone because his civilization had been destroyed. So that must have really been a point for him that had meaning that might escape us.
So he's writing this in 400 plus AD. And he's looking back on all these generations that have come and gone, all suffering some of the very, very same problems.
And Dan, just a point, Elder Oaks once talked about these being like a Urim and Thummim to us to receive revelation.
Great.
And that's how we access revelation. And I've often thought of it that when I'm reading my Book of Mormon, sometimes I don't even remember what I was reading in the morning. If you were to push me, I'd go, I don't remember.
You, Stan?
But I receive revelation. And sometimes, to be quite frank, I don't. But a lot of times, the impressions will come. And so the point, I think, isn't necessarily to become a great gospel scholar. Read your Book of Mormon and the Scriptures to receive revelation. And it comes, acts as though it were a Urim and Thummim.
I think that's what Moroni is telling us there, at least as I read that text. Let's go on. I think it's my turn to keep reading here. To come forth by the gift and power of God. There's that same idea. The intellect is critical and so forth, but the gift and power of God, and to the interpretation thereof. Sealed by the hand of Moroni, and hid up unto the Lord, to come forth in due time by way of the Gentile. You mentioned earlier, of course, of being Joseph Smith specifically, and our church probably in general, right?
Yes.
I think that phrase, or the word due time, that's not just saying, well, sometimes somebody will stumble upon this. We could almost hear it underlined in the due time of the Lord. That's really what he's saying. It's not right now, but it'll come in the proper time, which is really what I think due time here means, when the Lord's ready and when it's essential and necessary.
Clyde, I'm going to circle that because I've never noticed that word before, in due time. But really, this book of Scripture is really for us in the latter days to bless as individuals, as families, as a church, as the nation, the world, right? So that the timing is critical that we have this book. And the question is, are we using it, right? In our individual lives and lives of our families.
Well, I think, too, the way it's come forth really impresses me, because I heard a great lecture by this man here, Frank, on the translation of the Bible. And it was really magnificent. I still use all the stuff. And one thing he pointed out was that when in the translation process, he showed us a little Greek and stuff, and how it run-on sentences, and it goes on without punctuation, and then had us try a little translation in doing that. And I thought at the time, that would be next to impossible to get it right. And yet this, I think, very much by the spirit of prophecy and revelation.
Also this book is in a different form than it was when Joseph Smith began translating it. We have the 116 pages of manuscript, and of course those are lost, right? And the prophet Joseph feels like he's lost his soul for a time, and then the Lord reveals to him, though, that there's a second perspective or a second record that has that same time period. And how much like our lives that is, too. We all make mistakes, and we all sin, and yet the Lord knows that. He provided a way for us to overcome all those obstacles that come.
If we're willing.
So this book is a testimony to our lives that we too, can be blessed by the Lord as we go throughout our lives making the mistakes that we do.
And I think it's also significant to point out that it says that the interpretation thereof is by the gift of God. This really sets apart the perspective of the Bible from the Book of Mormon. Both records, of course, are inspired. Both were written by prophets of the Lord. But as far as the interpretation and the translation of that record, of those records in the latter days, the Book of Mormon was translated by the gift and power of God through the prophet Joseph Smith. And we have so many different translations of the Bible that exist, but the Book of Mormon was truly translated by the Lord.
I admire men like you, Frank. I mean, you have languages, Hebrew and Greek, but the language of the Spirit is what you have as a highest priority. That again, what Moroni is telling us, I believe, too, is to read it in the same way, because it's given to us in that way.
And the most important blessings, as was being mentioned, are spiritual and not academic.
Yeah, right. Can you imagine that? 4 professors coming to that conclusion.
Yeah.
Well, our time's going quickly here, but we have the second paragraph that is just full of meat, right? Wonderful things. Stan, you want to start with that and help us understand that paragraph?
An abridgment taken from the Book of Ether also, which is a record of the people of Jared who were scattered at the time the Lord confounded the language of the people when they were building a temple to get to heaven.
Building a tower.
Tower.
Probably a temple.
Yes, actually.
Sense, wasn't it? Yeah.
I'm sorry.
A false temple. I think there's a reality there I think that's important, is the Book of Mormon, as we read later, will actually testifies these historical events of the Bible actually did happen. There was a Tower of Babel. Languages were confounded. I mean, this is a second witness of those historical realities.
And speaking of the tower, they were trying to get to heaven through that tower. That's an interesting little tidbit off to the side, which is, of course, what we do in our temples.
So maybe your slip wasn't such a slip.
Yeah, actually it was.
Continue on, would you?
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is to show unto the remnant of the house of Israel what great things the Lord hath done for their fathers, and that they may know the covenants of the Lord, that they are not cast off forever, and also to the convincing of the Jew and the Gentile that Jesus is the Christ, the eternal God, manifesting himself unto all nations. And now if there are faults, they are the mistakes of men. Wherefore condemn not the things of God, that ye may be found spotless at the judgment seat of Christ.
Thank you, Stan. So we have the classic understanding the Book of Mormon is to convince Jew and Gentile, everyone really, that Jesus is the Christ. But there are other purposes for the Book of Mormon there too. What do you pick out of there, Clyde?
I see 3 purposes
Thank you.
here. Of course, the first is to show the remnant of the house of Israel, which would include us.
So remnant means
people who've remained or who have survived and yet been scattered throughout the nations.
Sure.
What great things the Lord has done for their fathers. And I look at that purpose and I think, well, so I ask my students, so why do we need to know about the great things that have been done in the Book of Mormon for Nephi and Lehi and their descendants? And the simple matter is that what he will do for them, he will do for us if we will follow in Nephi's footsteps. And so those great things show the power of God, his love, his concern, and his willingness to deliver his people with their faithful. And so these become a witness, and we can apply them to ourselves and realize that he can do the same for us. So at least that's the first one.
Excellent.
Maybe someone else wants to speak about the other 2, so I don't.
Nephi begins with this particular purpose right at the very beginning of the Book of Mormon. If you look in 1 Nephi chapter 1, verse 20, I think it's significant what Nephi says. He's talking about the reaction of the Jews in Jerusalem against his father Lehi, and then in the middle of that verse he says, "But behold, I, Nephi, will show unto you that the tender mercies of the Lord are over all those whom he hath chosen, because of their faith, to make them mighty even unto the power of deliverance." And then Nephi and Mormon and Moroni show example after example of the wonderful things that God has done for these people.
The deliverances, it's a book of deliverances. In a
It
way.
reminds me of Elder Tettle's talk, his last talk in General Conference. And he said, look, if Nephi can do it, we can do it. That touched my heart.